Hello, this is Hidde, and this is Advancing Authoring Tool Accessibility. Now, I'm a web accessibility specialist at Way, and I spend most of my time on the accessibility of authoring tools. And authoring tools are all about web content. Web content used to be quite boring. It used to be a wall of text that you could read. And of course, this was an amazing invention when it first came out. But in recent years, the world really changed, and we can now do so much with web content that makes it really exciting to look at. We get full control over white space with tools like Grid Layout and Flexbox. Now, these tools also make that the web is more complicated, that web pages look more complicated, and that the interface to edit them has to change as well. So there are also new ways to add web content, and things like components are really important, that are reusable bits of web content that are made to be reused across different pages. So rather than thinking in pages, we now really think in terms of components that we can reuse in different places. Now, with all these changes, there are some fun challenges for authoring tools as well. Now, what is an authoring tool? I'm sure you've used one of these. Authoring tools are things like WYSIWYG editors, online course creators, and learning management systems. They are things like Wikipedia, Save as HTML functionality, social media, form generating software, and site builders as well that let you build websites without using any code. So authoring tools are basically anything that creates web content, anything that creates or output HTML, makes it then available on some URL, are tools that create web content. And all of those have in common that they are a huge opportunity for us to try and improve web accessibility across the board. Now, you may know that we have these different standards at Way that all try to make the web more accessible by looking at web content. Now, WCAG is the big one. We'll be talking about it in a bit more detail later on in the workshop. WCAG is all about making web content more accessible. It's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now, there is also UAC, which is about making the software that displays web content, like browsers or user agents, more accessible so that they can display the content in a more accessible manner. And then the third part of this triad of different things that can improve web content are the tools that create web content. So we have these three parts. We have web content itself, the tools that display web content, and then the tools that create web content. And if all three take web accessibility into account, we will have a much more accessible web. Now, authoring tools specifically are essential in the picture of web accessibility, because if authoring tools take web accessibility into account, we are able to include more content creators. More people can create content for the web, because authoring tools would work for people with disabilities. So millions of people will be able to create content for the web. On the other hand, the content that is created will also be more accessible, because an authoring tool that takes accessibility into account will be able to let you deal with content problems before your website goes live. It might be able to recognize problems before the website goes live and warn the person creating the content and help them create a more accessible version than they originally had. I'll get into a bit more detail of how that kind of thing would work in a bit. Now, to get more information about what ATAG is, we have this document called ATAG at a Glance. I won't read out URLs here, but we will have shared the slides with you, and there will be a list of URLs included with that. So ATAG at a Glance is a page where you can find ATAG as a bulleted list that really neatly summarizes the kind of stuff that exists in ATAG. I'll also go into ATAG right now so that you can get a bit of an idea of what ATAG is all about and how it contributes to that picture of web accessibility. Now, ATAG consists of two big parts, Part A and Part B. The first part is about the editing experience or the authoring interface. So wherever someone goes and creates web content. And if we make that more accessible, we'll allow more people to create web content. Part B is about the output of the system and optimizing for its accessibility. So this is about creating more accessible output, and I'll get into that in much more detail later on. So let's look at the editing experience first. This is the A part of ATAG. This is relevant for people like Antonio. Antonio is a doctor who is colorblind and wants to set up recurring prescriptions for his patients. Try to do that through a web interface that's increasingly common these days. If this web interface creates web content and the patients will look at that, this may be categorized as an authoring tool. And because it will generate a web-based thing for the patients to look at and take to the pharmacy, we also want to make sure that the output that comes out of this interface is accessible too. Or me, who is a teacher and has reduced dexterity, wants to upload a take-home exam for students. Again, the learning management system is a web-based tool, and it may very well include web accessibility and ensure that May is able to use the interface so that students are able to take take-home tests. Or Anne, who is an influencer and motor impaired, just wants to upload her latest vlog on social media. Again, we need to make sure that the interface she does that through actually works for her and works with her disability and is inclusive of that. Now, a couple of things that ATAC would recommend, and this is all in the spirit of these ATAC criteria. So, for instance, make your interface work with keyboards so that more people are able to use it. That means things like having a visible focus indicator and ensuring that every control on the page works with a keyboard alone. Or there's bits in ATAC about displaying previews accessibly, because usually you'll have an editing part and you'll have a button that says, display a preview of what I've been working on. Of course, you want to make sure that the preview is also accessible. If you have something like spelling indication, you also want to make sure that is also done in an accessible way. Now in part B, we talk about the accessibility of the output. And this is all about helping the user to create more accessible output. Now John, who is a student and has no vision, wants to access results for his mathematics test. We want to make sure that the teacher who's using this authoring tool to upload mathematics results, that this authoring tool encourages them to do that in an accessible format. So maybe these results are displayed in a table. We want to make sure that that table is actually accessible to John. Maybe he wants to zoom in quite a bit, and we want to make sure that that doesn't break when he tries to do that. Or Alita, who is a privacy lawyer and blind, wants to take some clients out for lunch, but she wants to eat vegan food and she wants to make sure that the restaurant serves that. Again, we want to make sure that the authoring tool that the restaurant uses, this may very well be a web-based interface, that it outputs something that is accessible and it helps the people who work at the restaurant to create a very accessible menu so that Alita is able to access that. Now, good authoring tools, they really help content editors to make their content more accessible, and they can do that in a variety of ways. For instance, if we talk about alternative text, I think it's important that they make sure that it is possible to add alternative text in the first place, but they could go a mile further and also warn about things like if you're creating a link out of some image with alternative text, that actually has alternative text, because otherwise there won't be a name for that specific link. Or if the authoring tool is able to generate markup, we want to make sure that it actually generates accessible markup. Another thing that an authoring tool could play a huge role in is in detecting color contrast issues. Maybe our designer has designed this beautiful header with a bit of white text on a dark photo. As soon as the content editor changes that photo with something much lighter, like this photo of Korean food, it no longer has sufficient contrast. An authoring tool could play a role in that and say, well, this doesn't have sufficient contrast. Do you want to change the color of this text? Or use maybe bolder or larger text, which in some cases might also make the thing more accessible if the content is between 3 and 4.5 to 1. And lastly, if the content tool would have something that can check readability levels, again, the content tool could really help authors to create more accessible output, because it could warn you before you put your website live and tell you to make your readability levels slightly better. So basically, good authoring tools can really encourage you to create more accessible content. And there's a lot of work we do at Way to try and improve authoring tool accessibility. And one thing that we have is the document called Implementing ATAC 2.0, which has rationale, intent, and practical examples for the ATAC standard. But there's also some new work coming along, and that's the work I'm involved with. This work is all part of the Way Guide project funded by the European Commission, and it is focused on accelerating support for accessible authoring. So what we want is to really help authoring tool vendors to create more accessible authoring tools and tools that encourage accessibility better in all sorts of ways. Wouldn't it be interesting if you see all these advantages that authoring tools could have, if you could find authoring tools that do all those things and encourage accessibility in the ways we just described? Now, this list of authoring tools would be able to do exactly that. So it would let you filter by ATAC criteria, it would let you find tools that support web accessibility, and it would let you submit your own tool or your client's tool. Now, this list doesn't exist yet, but we do have a prototype that has this interface that lets you filter. But we're still working on ways to get content for this tool. Currently, it all has kind of dummy content. Now, in order to do that, we have developed something called the ATAC report tool, and this will let you create a report of the accessibility of your authoring tool. So here is the ATAC report tool. So with the ATAC report tool, you're able to create a report about the accessibility of your authoring tool, or maybe of your client's authoring tool. And as we've seen at the start, there are lots of different authoring tools out there. Here I am working on a report for CMS called Good CMS. And as you can see, I've reported on 6 out of 52 success criteria, and it's going to show me exactly how many I've already reported on. Now there's this About page where I can change things like the name of the CMS, maybe it's called Perfect CMS. I can change the performance target, maybe to be level A, at which point I only have to do 24 success criteria, or I can change it all the way to AAA, where I do 63 criteria, but let's change it back to level AA. Now I can change all sorts of things, and then for each criterion I can actually select the result. So for instance, I can say keyboard access works, and I can say it works very well with a keyboard C, and I can link to something else as well, because this is all markdown, and then I can press this view in the report and actually look at that and see, oh well, this has created a link for me, so there's some markdown support there as well. I would go through all of the different success criteria and say whether they've passed or failed, and when I'm done, I can then go to the report page and look at the report in its full glory. Now I'll see how many criteria I've passed, failed, how many I may have not checked. I can also view the ones I've not checked so that I can quickly access them, and then I can look at the results and see that they show up the way I want them to. Now what I can also do is download this report as HTML, which one is just going to show up as a very basic formatted HTML report, or I can say, well, I like this as pure data, and I'll get this in the JSON structure, which you can then import maybe in your own tooling, maybe take these results and build something with that. So the JSON export is also available there. So the ATAC report tool, in summary, it will let you manually report on ATAC criteria, let you save those as JSON or HTML, and it lets you create, maybe in the future, this doesn't work yet, but something we are looking at is to create a listing in that authoring tools list that I showed before. It would be cool if you could automatically say, let's push this to the list. That would be something we are looking at for the future or next iteration of this tool. Now, in conclusion, there's a couple of things I wanted to share today. One is that content creators would really benefit from more accessible authoring tools, because we would allow millions more people to create content for the web if we ensure that these tools are working for people with disabilities. End users also benefit, because if these tools encourage the people who work with it to create more accessible content, there will be more accessible content on the web, so that would be super beneficial for everyone. Authoring tools are really everywhere. They're in healthcare, they're in education, they cut across a lot of different sectors that really impact people's daily lives. Now that's a wrap. What I want to leave you with today is the question, how would you improve authoring tools to make accessibility better on the web? the tools themselves, but also how would you make them encourage authors better to make more accessible web pages. So after this, I'll be showing up in a live Q&A where you would be able to give us your thoughts on that question or ask any other question that you may have regarding authoring tools and web accessibility. Thanks very much for watching.